Hi everyone, welcome to the Prime Use series of interviews with top business and technology experts. I'm Dana Kohut, and today I'm delighted and honored to welcome Or Weis, who is CEO and co-founder at Permit.io. How are you?
Oh, very well. Happy we get this chance to talk, and sorry for the light delay.
No problem. You're still in the office, but it's very late now.
Yes, I'm in Tel Aviv. It's 8:30 p.m. And I actually have several more hours in the office.
Wow.
Uh, so don't worry about it. It's not your fault.
Okay, I got it. Yeah. So it's a usual life of a startup owner, right? So long hours in the office, working on weekends.
Yeah, as a startup founder, like also a lot of our employees also work long hours, but especially as a founder, Um, if it's setting up a startup is not easy. If you want to achieve amazing things, you need to put in a lot of effort. And but it's okay. I'm I'm in really acceptance with the choices that I've made in life, and I'm happy with them. Good sides and bad sides alike.
Yeah, it's clear. But I know it's not the first time that you are a founder of a startup. So it's something that you have already been through. You have the experience of starting a company. So probably it's a little bit easier for you than for those who are first-time founders.
That's so I think thanks to that I kind of knew from the get-go what I was getting myself into. So I can't really blame anyone. Uh, I knew what I was getting myself into, and as I said, I'm happy with it. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's a lot of fun and it's challenging. And on most good days, you feel like you really have an impact. You're really changing a small but important segment of the world. At least that's how I feel about it. And it's
Yeah,
worked well.
yeah, actually, that's true. I actually know lots of people who are working in startup companies and they would never give it up for, like well set life in an enterprise organization. So they say there's this great energy and vibe and also the feeling that you can make so much impact, right, in a small organization comparing to a larger one. So yeah, totally get it.
Yeah, I worked at some larger corporations, and I always almost always feel like you're spending most of your time just pushing through the organization itself as opposed to tackling the problems itself, and that can be very frustrating. So I think it's a matter of taste, like pros and cons, everything in life. And I prefer the being more in the bleeding edge, taking more of the abrasion of it, but having my efforts focused on the problem itself and not just politics and organizational flows and stuff like that.
Or I would be really curious to know more about you and about your company, Permit.io. So if you could give us a brief overview of what company does and what type of problems it solves to your customers, to the customers, right? That would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah, for sure. My background starts at the intelligence core at the IDF. Well, actually, I started working with computers at the age of 5, but my career really became a career after my service in the intelligence core. There, I was an officer, developer, reverse engineer, project manager, yada, yada, yada. I served for 6 years, mostly as an officer. And then afterwards, I worked in a startup called Intigua, where we basically did containers before containers were a thing, but with a very bad go to market. Definitely not as good as Docker's, or at least Docker's initial go to market. Um, and after that, I worked in a few other startups. I was a VP of R&D in a cybersecurity company called Netline that caters for governments and like-minded agencies. Only worked on defensive projects, not offensive ones, and really proud of that in retrospect. Then between 2016 and up till two and some years ago, I co-founded and ran as CEO a company called Rookout, a production debugging solution, another dev tool company. I'd even go as far as saying the company that created the production debugging space. During my time in Rookout, I ended up rebuilding our access control 5 times when the company wasn't even 3 years old. And I was like, well, that's stupid. I don't want to do it once, let alone 5 times. And looking back, I realized that I've been building access control and permissions for products that I've been working on probably thousands of times. Getting
Hmm.
together with my co-founder Asaf, who worked at Facebook at the time, and there we saw that they invested a team of 30 people for half a decade to build their level of access control. So we knew it's both an annoying problem for developers today and also down the road. It's only going to get worse. So that really brought us to create Permit. And Permit is a full stack permission solution with the basic premise of you as a developer not having to build permissions ever again. This is not something that is unique to any product. So we give you something off the shelf that you can bake into your software so you can focus on building your actual product. And that's Permit in a gist. We built it on top of open source. We adopted a project called OPA, and we created an open source project called OPAL, Open Policy Administration Layer. And on top of them, we provide end-to-end experiences as part of Permit. Low-code experiences that generate code for you and allow you to manage your entire authorization and permission space. There you'll find experiences that you've seen a billion times across a billion different applications. So things like user management with the ability to assign roles, API key management, secrets management, audit logs, the ability to see who did what within the system, invites, approval flows, the ability to ask permissions from another user, impersonation, the ability to view the system as if you're another user without actually logging in as that user, emergency access, and the list goes on and on. But probably our most important experience is our policy editor, which I like to describe as a low-code interface that even a monkey can use, or even a product manager can use. Ironically, the people that like that joke the most are product managers, which I found really, really interesting.
Hmm.
Um, so the idea there is that instead of having to learn complex policy languages like Rego, you can use a very simple interface to generate the rules that you need. And this can be done by the developers themselves, saving them time and friction, and also be delegated to the other stakeholders in the company that need to chime in on the conversation. In the end of the day, connecting users and customers to your product is a critical thing. Like if you're unable to do that, your product's not going to go anywhere. And if every little interaction that the product manager, security manager, compliance, professional services support, if every time they need to tweak access for the product, they need to go to R&D and ask them for changes, everyone's going to have a bad time. So the idea is that you have these experiences that you can use on your own, but also delegate to other people. And that's me and Permit and a little over a gist, I'd say.
Yeah, it's very interesting, and I would like to take a step back and to talk about the transition from working at Rookout, and I have interviewed before Rookout, and you were a founder and CEO there, and now you have started a new company focused on security. So tell us more about that transition and what motivated you.
So first of all, I'd say both companies are dev oriented. They're not pure DevOps or pure security. I view Permit as a DevSecOps
Okay.
solution, for example. So at the core of both companies, it's catering to the pain points of developers. The personas we think about when we're solving the problem are the developers themselves. As I mentioned before, with Permit, all the stakeholders get value from the product, but we start from the developers themselves as they delegate and are able to build things for the other stakeholders. Um, on top of that, building a critical infrastructure component with Rookout really taught me a lot about security. In the end of the day, with a debugging solution that you embed into your production, the product itself might gain visibility to a lot of sensitive information because it's essentially all the information within the application. So we had to find a solution for how to integrate with a product without exposing all of its data to ourselves as a third-party service. So that's where we started to build for Rookout a hybrid architecture. There's a component called a controller, and all the data flows go through it instead of through the Rookout cloud.
Mhm.
And that was a critical infrastructure architectural moment. And I've actually leveraged that understanding into building both Opal, our open source project, into Permit, and Permit itself. Permit also decouples your data plane and your control plane. You can use Permit to enforce permissions in your product without exposing any data to Permit itself. This is done through the Opal architecture. Opal, which keeps all of your decision points, all your microservices for authorization up to date. It does so not by accessing the data itself and sending the data to all of those decision points. It instead sends instructions on where to get the data. So each of your services with that sidecar, ideally, for authorization, each of them gets only the data that they need and only the policies that they need when they need them. So each service can work in a kind of a zero trust, need to know basis architecture. And most importantly, without exposing any of the sensitive data to the Opal server or to the Permit cloud, and without being dependent on its availability. So because everything is running locally, it's managed by the cloud, but it runs locally, even if Permit is down, even if your service isn't connected correctly, everything continues to work seamlessly because it's all local.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that we are right now seeing that developers are playing a big role in the security. So maybe you could deep dive a little bit more into that trend.
I think that it's very, very apparent, especially with shift left. So in the past, security kind of tried to, security people like the CISO group or security engineers or analysts tried to build moats around the different components that are part of the organization or the products the organization are building. But as things are becoming more interconnected, and I think that's plain to see how things are becoming more
Yeah.
interconnected, it's basically become impossible to do. There are so, first of all, the components of software are shrinking down. They're microservices. So you have tiny components running about, jumping between different areas, and constantly being interconnected between one another. So if you try and silo all of them, at the best case scenario, you're going to have a bad time. At the worst case scenario, it's going to fail and everything is going to be vulnerable. So instead of that, we need to delegate and the security aspects into the software itself. We need to sprinkle a little bit of access control, a little bit of security into every component that we build. And that means that the responsibility at the end of the day is at the hands of developers. The developers building those components, those microservices, those pieces of software. More and more, those developers are not just developers, they're different creators within the company. They're not the classic developers that only write code thanks to low code interfaces, thanks to AI components, but everyone needs to be able to connect to the security element and bring that to their work. So yeah, I think it's very apparent that developers are becoming one of the most critical personas working on security. And I think it's also clear that this is only going to get more like that. It's going to accelerate as well. So it's really important that we enable them to work on this in the right way now before it becomes too challenging to even think about.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And several times you already mentioned low code. If you do a research, you can see that there's even a kind of concern that one day it might replace developers. Do you think there is such a probability?
I think so. I think there's semantics in general with specialization, and this is what we're talking about. We're adding more complex layers and we're adding more simplifying interfaces on top of them, and everyone's getting a new sliver, a new segment within the new space. So this has been happening since the dawn of humanity. Like at the beginning, everyone would be hunter-gatherers, and then we had people specializing in hunting and some specializing in farming, and it just we kept adding more layers and more responsibilities and more complexities being wrapped into specific professions. So the same thing is going to happen with happening with software, is going to happen with software. So in my perspective is that developers are going to change. More people are going to become developers, just not your run-of-the-mill what we think about developers today. And the developers of today are going to be specializing on the more concrete, more complex areas, the more sensitive areas, and essentially specialize. So more people will come in, more people are going to work on software, and more people are going to find specialized areas and specialized verticals that they're going to focus on. And we're going to have more developers. They're just not going to be necessarily the same developers as we think about today.
Yeah, totally agree. And there is such opinion that low code is not only simplifying life for developers, but for other teams that are working in the company. So would you agree with that? And what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also very apparent with Pyramid's product. So we provide that low-code policy editor that I mentioned. So the idea there is, first of all, for the developers to be able to write policies with ease without having to learn all the complexities of the IAM and authorization space. But it also, as I kind of mentioned before, it allows those developers to delegate it to the other stakeholders, to the product managers themselves, to security, to compliance. So I'll give an example of how this usually rolls out. So you have a customer, and you have a product, and you have a customer, and one of your customers comes in and says, "I want a new role. You have only 3 roles in your system. I want to add a role of my own." Or you currently only have roles. I want to add conditions, like I only want users that belong to a specific department, only users that have ownership of something, only users that work during specific hours or in specific locations. Those are more complex conditions that are not necessarily roles. And I want to be able to express that in your product, and I can't do it now. So they talk to the product manager and ask them to do so. The product manager today would go to R&D and open a ticket, and that ticket will trickle down to a developer, a single developer, or at most a small team of developers, and they'll have to figure it out how to implement this. This is how it works today. That generates that, so the product manager opening that ticket thinks like, it's no big deal. Like, it will take them, like a day to do so. But when the engineers start to look at it, they realize, oh, this is actually multiple months, maybe sometimes a whole year of development that they need to put in. And that's both frustrating for the product manager and for the developers. So what if instead the developer can go to that product manager and say, hey, we have a generic flexible infrastructure that uses low code. It can stretch to what you need, and you can do this on your own. So just go into the back office and click on add role, or click on add a user set to define those conditions, and you can do this on your own. So now we've reduced friction and frustration for both sides. And I think that's, as we build more complex products, as we're adding more conditions, and we're adding more scenarios, these kind of stories are only going to become more commonplace and more frequent. So either we're going to see more frustration on the rise, or we're going to see low code taking that frustration away.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Or I would like to clarify, right? So when you talk about this, like adding roles and using attribute-based access control, what it means that Pyramid.io, you have built essentially a building block that any company can use to build into their product. And the use case for that would be, let's say, company uses Salesforce, where all the data about the existing customers is sitting, and they would not want anyone within an organization to have access to that. So this is where your building block, right, your software and your solution comes into play. So they would have this like permissions, access, and restrictions. Is this right?
So that's the idea there. And the idea is to also recognize that because your software is evolving, this challenge is evolving. Everyone starts, like when you're building, when you start a small company or you're working on your side project, everyone starts with a policy model I like to call admin, not admin. As a developer, I'll be the admin. Everyone else is not an admin, and I can change things and you can't. But then the product gains some traction. People use it, and then they go, hey, we need more permissions to manage things there. And then you move from admin, not admin, to admin, not admin, and super admin. Then you move to access control lists, like you have specific lists of who can do what. Those are often hard-coded into the database or into the code itself, and that obviously doesn't scale. And then you often find yourself at RBAC, role-based access control, which is kind of like the bread and butter of the permission space, primarily because it's easy to think with RBAC, and most people know it. So usually companies end up there because they have a customer saying, I'm used to having roles in other applications. Can you also give me roles in your application? So you almost always find yourself in RBAC, but RBAC doesn't cover all the scenarios. RBAC essentially works by having roles that are assigned to users, and you get all your permissions directly from those roles. But what about other common scenarios? Like, let's say a policy like only users that have paid for a feature can use it. Are you going to have a paying user role? That's kind of weird. What about geolocation? Only users within the continental US should be able to use this feature. Or what about only users in Europe should work with this GDPR compliant server? Or what about quotas? That's really dynamic. Only users that are still within their usage quota for the month should be able to use this feature. These are not things that you can describe as roles. They are very complex and very dynamic. And more importantly, they're becoming very commonplace. And these kind of scenarios are becoming more frequent and have more examples of them. And every application is a snowflake with its own unique scenarios and logic. That's why with Permit, we started with role-based access control and the ability to embed that into your system. But now we're adding attribute-based access control with low code. So you will always be able to describe the scenario you want through that ABAC policy, through the attribute-based access control policies. But you'll be able to do so with the simplicity that Monkey can use, even Flow, that we provided with RBAC. We've put a lot of thought how to take something so complex and make it as simple like that. And what we ended up with something that we decided even to patent because it was so different in the way we think about it. And by adding that low code aspect, I think it will really enable a lot of teams to work faster and with less frustration and with more stakeholders on the products that they're building.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I would also be interested to know about the competition. So, what do you think what is it that sets Permit.io apart from the rest of the competition on the market?
So the space is really warming up. I think after the authentication space warmed up, like 10 years ago, people would be like, I'm not going to use an authentication solution. It's too critical. I'm going to build it myself. Nowadays, no one's going to say that. They're like, oh, of course I'm going to use an authentication solution. I don't want to make silly mistakes that will make my product vulnerable. So everyone uses authentication services today. And now now that authentication is mature, authorization and permissions can start evolving in the space. And the space is really heating up. We see other companies coming in, and we're seeing a lot of customers, especially in the highly compliant spaces, healthcare companies, fintech companies, wanting to adopt this solution. So we're seeing a lot of other players coming into the space. And but I think what's unique about Permit is really our perspective. I think first of all, it starts with empathy. I think that is kind of unique to our approach. We kind of realize that, but that essentially the developers and the other stakeholders don't give a damn about this thing. No one wants to build permissions. They want to build their own products. So we need to help them get rid of this. I feel that some other vendors are really excited about building some amazing technology. And so they give you an API, they give you infrastructure, but all the experiences on top, you need to build on your own. And those experiences are really what's unique about Permit. We want to take you end to end. Unless you want to build something, you don't have to. Unless you want to write policy code, you don't have to. We'll generate that code for you. Unless you want to build a user management interface, and unless you want to build approval flows, you won't have to. We'll provide those ready-made for you to embed into your back office and into your application, and they will all be low-code interfaces that you can delegate to anyone in your company and also to the customers themselves. And I think that's what really, to sum up, that's what's really unique about Permit, being empathetic towards developers and the other people working at organizations, and understanding that this is not about building amazing technology. This is about delivering experiences that take this annoyance off the table.
Yeah, I really like the part where you're saying that you're actually taking away lots of pain, and instead of focusing on building the permission block, right, over and over again, you're actually allowing companies to focus on business critical activities, right, on developing their business. So that part is really strong and something that is that helps you to differentiate on the market. Yeah, or I really enjoyed our conversation and I want to thank you for your time and for the insights. I believe many of our listeners will find them really helpful and valuable. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Dana. It was a pleasure. Thank you for all the good questions, and I had a blast talking with you, and I look forward to staying in touch.